It's a good show.
Hello and welcome to Humans Who Make Games, a personal, intimate conversation with the people who created some of our favorite video games. I'm Adam Conover, and this episode is a little bit different. If you follow the game industry at all, you've probably heard that working conditions in the industry are, let's say, not great. I've seen disturbing reports of developers on big AAA games being forced to work 18-hour days for 7 days a week for months on end for low pay. Job security is apparently very low. I've even heard of entire studios being fired as soon as their very successful game comes out and is a big success. They just lay off everybody anyway. The problem is we very rarely hear from the developers who experience it what it's like to work under these conditions. So in order to find out more, I put together this interview. On the show today, we're going to be speaking to two members of Game Workers Unite, an organization dedicated to advocating for workers' rights in the games industry. And since both of our interviewees today are active game developers working in the industry, and we want them to speak honestly without putting their jobs at risk, they're going to be going by Steve and Emma for the purposes of this interview. We're going to be talking about their experiences working under the intense pressure that the video game industry puts on people. We're going to hear all about what that terrible word crunch means, and we will talk about the challenges of unionizing the video game industry. This is Humans Who Make Games, and please enjoy this interview with Steve and Emma from Game Workers Unite. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course.
So you're both associated with Game Workers Unite, correct?
Yep, that is correct, yes.
How do you describe that organization?
Game Workers Unite is essentially a completely horizontal organization. We don't have any kind of like directors or leaders or anything. It's just a grassroots organization of game developers and workers who are, coming together over the common cause of wanting to unionize the games industry.
And you're both developers yourselves, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Can you say in what capacity? Or
Sure. I am a producer in AAA games.
Cool.
I am a technical artist in AAA games.
Well, so before we get into talking about Game Workers Unite and those issues, which I'm really interested in, I just want to talk a little bit about like your more personal relationships with video games and the industry and everything else. I mean, what is your... I get self-conscious about this being the opening question every time, but I really like the way that it sets up the rest of the conversations. I'm going to ask it anyway. What's your first memory of video games?
You want to go?
Oh, yeah. Gosh, I remember I was maybe 2 or 3, and my parents, and this was in like 90, 91, so this will kind of date things, but my parents had an Atari 2600, which I think was like a decade-old machine at that point.
Yeah, wait, that was the early 90s. So I'm older than you. You were 2 or 3. I was born in 83, and I never even saw a 2600. Maybe my cousin had one, but,
I think it might have been a hand-me-down or something, but I remember just being super young and playing, I think it was like F1, some racing game on the Atari, and like I would just like sit in my parents' bed, because I was too young to go to school and play this game for like hours. Other
That's
than that,
a really good memory. Like you have a good memory. You remember something that happened when you were 2 or 3.
Maybe it was 3 or 4. It was before I was going to school, so it was young.
The Atari 2600 is also kind of like... it's kind of like the Duplo block of video game systems.
Yeah.
Everything's so big and chunky, and like you don't need to see very well to like understand what's going on.
Yeah.
You want to talk chunky old game systems? I grew up with my mom's ColecoVision, which is
I've
like the
never
Atari's
played
like
one.
unfortunate, ugly little cousin, and like it's not a pleasant game.
I grew up with one of my before I ever had an NES. I might have talked about this in a different episode. I forget if I have an Atari 800, which was the PC that you would plug into your TV. It was like an Apple IIe or that kind of thing. And so that was my Atari experience. My grandfather gave me one that he had like literally found in a dumpster and fixed because he was like a telephone repairman type guy. So I had, and he gave me like all these floppies and like cartridges that he had like got at flea markets and stuff like that. And that's what I played with. But I don't have like a relationship with like Atari 2600 or that. It's like these are 3 very weird systems. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like little blips. How did that? I mean, what were you like with video games like as kids, each of you?
For me, I mean, my fondest memories were with my like handheld consoles. First with the Game Boy Color, where I played Pokemon Red with my brother. I was maybe 4 or 5 when I got that. That was probably my first proper game in console.
Wow.
So like for me, games was always like a thing I did in my spare time, whether like on the playground or after school at some kind of club with my friends, or like in the back seat of a car on a road trip trying to like catch the like street lights as they go by, like because they weren't self-illuminated screens.
Yeah.
So that was like games as a kid, like kind of small personal little adventures I could take with me.
That's awesome. For me, it was honestly, it was PC gaming or Mac gaming, which was actually a thing at the time.
Yeah.
Growing up, my dad had like the Macintosh. I remember games like Marathon or gosh, what else? A lot of browser games. I remember like when the internet was starting to really come around, there were like those really basic, like you log on and you have like 10 points that you spend to do, basically click 10 buttons, visit 10 pages on the site
Neopets.
to gain resources. Neopets was a great one. Yeah.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that was like, for me, it was, we had consoles and we had, handhelds, but for me, it was mostly like getting home from school and then getting to sit down at the computer and getting like my hour of time because my parents knew I couldn't be on too long.
Right.
To just play whatever games or like demo discs, just random games that I'd play for maybe half an hour and never see again.
Yeah, Mac games were so like specific in terms of there are so few of them and they like only existed on the Mac. And so like, did you play Glider? Do you remember Glider?
No, I don't know that.
Oh, that's like the archetype Mac game. Well, so I don't need to get into it. It's like your little paper airplane, and you like fly back and forth and stuff. And it had a level creator that was like a really big deal.
Oh,
really?
That's awesome.
Because one of the first like PC games I ever played was Unreal Tournament with like my dad and my uncle, and that was like my first experience with like making levels and stuff because it packed in kind of like level like creation tools and things.
Yeah, I loved playing with stuff like that. I remember playing with like I had a Doom level creator that was like a really big deal for me that I did a lot with. And I remember like figuring out that like I could that like it would crash the game if I didn't put like a wall on one of the back rooms, and if one of the creatures I placed would like accidentally run outside the border, like the game would crash. And I was able to like it was one of those like first experiences, like sort of feeling like thinking programmatically in a way where
really thinking about kind of like the connections between all the different assets in the game, not just like I want to play this game and there are these things, but like how do these things actually really interact?
Right. Well, so I have talked about this on the show before. The funny thing for me is that I was thinking that way about games. I was immersing myself in games. I was like, I knew a little bit of computer programming. I never really had the thought, oh, I would like to make a game. I want to be around them more. I like fans. What if that was my life? But I was never like, here's my idea, or like, here's, I never actually got into it. So what was that leap like for you guys?
Oh, so it was a similar thing for me. Like, I loved video games growing up, but I was like, this is not a job. Like, nobody aspires to make video games. And I thought that way all through like high school, even though deep down I wanted to make video games. I was like, oh, I'll go do architecture or something. I went off to college, did that for 4 years, got a degree, and at the end I was like, I really don't want to do this. I want to make video games. So I basically went back to school, went to a for-profit school for game art and design, and like I was like, holy crap! Like there are people like working to get in this industry. You don't just fall into it.
Yeah. So through that experience, was that sort of like, oh, you see the path through which you can get into it by going to that school?
You mean like being made aware of like what the career is?
When you said there are people, you saw that there are people working to get into it, right? That reminds me of when I wanted to do comedy, then I moved to New York and I saw other people doing it. And I was like, oh, if you take these steps, if you put this time in this way, it's not a fantasy. It's like I'm at A and I'm trying to get to Z, and here's that person's at J. I don't know why I chose letters instead of numbers, but and so is that what you meant? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So just knowing that there was a path, like you pick up these skills, you learn how to do level design or 3D modeling or character modeling or whatever. Like there was a set of skills that you could figure out, and if you picked up those skills, then you would have a resume. Like you could have a portfolio. You could apply to companies, and they would hire you and pay you money to make video games. Like it just made it so obvious.
Yeah, and there's a limited number of people with those skills, so they'll want to hire people.
Exactly.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I had no conception of what it really meant to make a game, even though, like, I did dabble with, like the Unreal level editor, but that was more playing than actually, like, creating a game. And I never had any, like, ambition to be a game developer, but I went to university for film school, actually. And the reason why actually I'm in games now is like I really actually very much disliked all the people in my film program. They were very egotistical, and it's a very prestigious program, so that's why people were like that.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I had a bunch of really amazing people I met in the games program. A lot of like, kind of like misfits and queer folks like me, and like just really interesting folks who had different backgrounds. And I was really attracted to that. And like the program I was in, had a bit more experimental edge on what their philosophy of game development was. So I was really attracted by those people, and like seeing them making games, whether it was small games or larger projects, made it real to me, this concept of like you can actually go make a game. Like you can open up Unreal and start throwing cubes around and like just moving stuff and making it really work.
And so what were your first steps in that direction? I mean, so you went to the college.
Yeah, I went to the college. I think I succeeded despite the college, not because of it. Frankly, the school was awful.
That's true of everybody who goes to a college.
Yeah, I mean, for-profit colleges are their own ball of nightmares. But this was a school where if students knew, like, I'm the instructors probably aren't going to teach me well, but I have access to all like the software that I need. I have all the time that I need. If you're proactive about picking up the skills, and there were some faculty who were genuinely interested in like making you good at making video games and not just someone that they could shovel out to QA or whatever and claim like, we have like high placement numbers.
Oh, God. Oh, you really are a product in that situation when you're in the for-profit college. Wow, they want to get their numbers up with you.
Yeah, it was pretty wild.
Wow.
But like I said, there were a couple faculty who really cared, and they would tell you like, you're really bad at concept art. Like, you should not be drawing, but animating, maybe you're good at animating. Character modeling or programming. Like they would encourage you to pick up the skills because they recognize that the industry is really, really specialized at this point.
Yeah.
So they would try and figure out like, you're going to be the like level designer, so I'm going to try and train you to be the level designer, even though technically I have to teach you to rig in this class or something. So
that's kind of weird. I didn't realize that they would sort of put you on that path that early.
I had a similar experience with a lot of my teachers, or at least the ones that were more engaged, for sure. I mean, I think sometimes curriculum really just aren't designed to the actual individual needs of their students. I think that's really common in the U.S. and other like educational systems like ours. And so I mean, it was kind of up to you and up to the teachers to really craft that direction. And whether it's like maybe I'm supposed to be teaching rigging, but this kid's really good at like maybe environmental art or something. Like I'm gonna throw some stuff their way to keep them moving down the track.
Yeah, we had a basic like learning to program class, and as we were supposed to make a game in Flash or an action script. And I was like, this is a horrible language and it's kind of dying. Can I do this in Unity? And the instructor was like, I don't know Unity. If you want to make a game in Unity, go crazy and I'll treat it like any other game in the class. So that's
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had that same. It's just funny that experience you're describing of like having access to the equipment reminds me of, I went to a liberal arts college, and like me and my friends started a sketch comedy group, and I was a philosophy major, and I was just good with computers, and so I was like editing the videos and stuff like that, and I was like, I'll take an animation class. We have an animation class, and it was the worst. It was the worst class. It was mostly, I was like, it was like a liberal arts school with like an art department, and it was in the art department. I was like, this is just, people are just practicing like making up what their shitty work is about. Like they're just describing their artist statement to like get past the discussion portion. I was like, are you going to teach us keyframing? Like that's what and so I taught myself more about animation than the professor knew, but it was also a worthwhile class to take because I did like 6 to 8 cool animations, and I've learned my way around the computer lab. And that was the most important part, was like, oh, we've got Power Mac G4s that we can use until 3 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah, render time. I mean, the school had like an animation program as well, and I think that was the most valuable thing, was you had a server farm that you could farm out your renders to. So,
right, yeah. I mean, we would we would share video files like on the server and stuff like that. Would like move stuff around. It was like, because nobody could actually really afford to do that kind of thing on like home PCs at the time. At least not what college students brought. But it's so funny though that you would have to like. They would be like, "Oh, you're going to be the level designer." Like, I mean, this is kind of corny to say, but it's like you're choosing a character class too soon.
Yeah, and
in a way.
And honestly, I think that was the case. The school, most of the students in the school ended up trying to pursue environment art because that was what many of the instructors knew, and that was kind of like, that's like, we're pretty good at producing environment artists. We're trash at producing pretty much anyone else unless they have a lot of initiative. But it was very much like, we need to make this person fit like a specific AAA role that this school is good at producing. Not, we want this person to be good at making video games. It's, we want this person to, like, we want to be able to get this guy into 2K Marin or whatever studio was nearby.
Yeah.
With less of a concern of like, this person understands the ins and outs of the industry. It's
kind of funny because people talk so much about higher education being like, oh, it should be more about getting a job. There's that whole philosophy of like, oh, it should be really focused on getting you a job. But it sounds like that school was, and as a result, like people weren't quite getting as full an education because it was just like, if we're optimizing for this one thing, then that's all you're going to get out of it.
Yeah, and I think that ended up being the case. Was they weren't even that good at producing environment artists, but people didn't find that out like until a term or two before their degree was over, and they just spent like $80,000 on it. And by then it's like, well, I can't go back and do animation. Like, I'm just going to go in the industry as an environment person and maybe make the transfer at my job or something.
I mean, is that what you did? Did you
go into like environment art?
Oh, not environment art, but just like, okay, like I'm out of here, like onto the industry, like here we go.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to get contract work like sort of towards the end of my time there. Like I knew 2 or 3 months before I graduated that I had work. So and that was just me like having a portfolio and like applying to jobs at a million places, and just the shotgun approach of, if I ask 100 people to give me a job, one of them might give me a job.
Right.
So.
And one did?
Yeah, and one did.
And so what was that experience like after, being in school for that thing and being sort of just like, were you just jumping straight into the industry?
Yeah. I was living at home at the time, and it was remote contract work. So it was basically like, all right, I'm not going to school anymore. Now I'm, waking up at 8 or 9 in the morning and Skyping with the rep at the company and figuring out what my day's work was going to be, and like downloading files, doing work, uploading files.
Oh, so you're working remotely.
Yeah, it was a trip. I was like, oh, is this what the industry's like? Like I get to stay at home all day? That's rad.
That is so interesting, because that is like the complete opposite of my kind of on-ramp into the industry. Because like right out of school, I worked an unpaid internship for like way too many months because they just couldn't find the money, when they really should have, and also are mildly legally required to in the state of California.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, like I was there in person every single day, working overtime even though I wasn't paid. And like, it was really demanding in the same ways that I'm sure yours was. But like being there in person added a lot of pressure to the job that like at least I couldn't really escape from, because like every day that was my physical reality as well.
Yeah, I could just, like if I answered the email, I could go outside and be like, I'm just going to work on this. Maybe I'll push it off for 3 hours, but they'll get the file eventually.
I mean, my life right after college, I was like, I was doing like freelance web development and stuff like that. And it was a weird life because I was, like 21 and I had like an empty apartment in Brooklyn, and I would get like weird freelance gigs, and then I would just like work until 4 a.m. I would like take Adderall and like drink a lot of Diet Coke and like just like I would get weird is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Was it weird? Like, was it like
there
that?
was definitely like you wouldn't know when the workday ended, and even if the
Yeah.
workday ended, you were still in the same room that you had been working in all day. You know, if I was on the computer playing games or whatever. So it was very much like I told myself that I would do 8 hours a day and I'd actually log hours, but they were just paying me like a monthly amount. So I would often be working until 10 at night. Sometimes until like 1 a.m, 2 a.m, depending on whatever I was working on at the time.
Yeah. And then Emma, what were you doing on the internship? Like, what kind of work was that?
It was originally like a kind of production job, but also writing and also localization and also like doing everything they couldn't cover with their staff.
An internship is supposed to be like,
Yeah.
you're gonna get coffee and then we'll teach you a little bit in like one meeting.
An internship is supposed to be, like a 90% educational experience, right?
Yeah.
10% like work that benefits the company, but
Yes.
that's never the case.
Yeah.
And often I found myself, not just like working harder than a lot of the staff people there because like I was, kind of desperate out of necessity. Like I wasn't making an income. I was living in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
which is like impossible to pull off. But I was very fortunate to pull that off. And like, people were just throwing every random task at me that they could. And that meant I had to have like this massive, broad skill set, which was very difficult. Instead of just like, here, do all these, environmental artist kind of tasks or what have you. It's like,
Yeah.
do some writing, give some feedback on this design, play test this thing, QA this build. And it's like, what?
Was that valuable? I mean, I imagine
yes.
some might say it was valuable.
Absolutely. No, it was deeply valuable. And like, I often do pride myself on having a very broad skill set. It makes me a much better producer because I can pretty much interface with any single person on the team.
Right.
Doesn't matter if you're an engineer. It doesn't matter if you're a 3D artist, a rigger. It doesn't matter if you're a sound designer. I've done that at some point, and I've interfaced with people who do that work at some point. So it really, really, helps my craft. But it was a terrible position.
And it was unpaid.
And it was unpaid and probably illegal. And,
I just want to say all internships are bullshit, and almost all of them are illegal.
Yeah.
They're just not. It's just not enforced. But
Yeah.
that we did a video of it for my TV show. You can
Paid
just go look it up.
apprenticeships are nothing, pretty much, is my stance.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
just junior positions, just hire junior staff members.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, what was the environment like at the studio?
So this was a commercial mobile game studio, and it was a fairly small group of people, like 20 to 30 some odd people, on average. But it was pretty stressful. It was one of those situations where like mobile games is pretty scrappy, even though often studios are pretty stable. The like month-to-month funding situation is not. So there's always this kind of air of like, maybe we'll crash and burn. Maybe we will not. Maybe we'll take on more people to do more like projects. But I don't know. Like, yeah, mobile games is volatile, and that's very stressful.
There's something weird about it. Like, despite the fact that mobile gaming, by which you mean cell phone gaming, I assume, right?
Yeah, primarily like iPhone and Android apps and things.
Yeah, despite the fact that those platforms have been out for 10 years now.
Yeah.
It's been over 10 years since the original iPhone came out. So, despite that fact, it's still this really weird part of the market where it's like you open the App Store, and apart from like the one or two indie darlings, it's like just like, what the fuck
Infinite
is this?
copies
Where
of
did
the
it come
same
from?
Screaming
thing.
face icon.
Yeah,
It's
the
like the
same
red-
guy on 20 icons. It's ridiculous.
It's like the seamy underbelly kind of red light district.
Oh, yeah.
Like you don't know what guys in trench coats kind of a little bit.
And you don't get a lot of coverage either. Like, for instance, like it's very rare, like a place like Waypoint or a place like Kotaku will just like do a piece on the mobile games industry because it's not particularly popular unless something like Animal Crossing comes to mobile, right? Or like, like Square Enix releases something on mobile, then like, yeah, they'll cover it. But
Like Flappy Bird, a weird story like that.
yeah, something kind of out there. But like, what's really interesting is like mobile games is the like biggest portion of the international games industry
Yeah.
by profit, by people working in it. by like geographic distribution.
How couldn't it be? It
has the hugest like install base.
The install base is in the billions.
Yeah. No, it's completely nuts. It's like the biggest part of the industry, and nobody covers it. No one covers the labor issues that are going on in the mobile games industry, which are whack. Like, they're not okay. And yeah, I don't know. It's this kind of like, like you said some kind of like red light district or like underbelly. It's like, you've got like gambling problems going on. Various like countries are like fighting against like developers putting out like super exploitative like material in their marketplaces, and like, I don't know.
It's such a bummer. Can you imagine how different the world would be if Apple understood like 10% of video games?
Oh my God.
If just like they got it just a little, and it's so clear for a little while, it was like, oh, maybe they're going to get it. And like maybe they'll take over everything, and then just through sheer knowing nothing about how to run a game store, knowing nothing about what a good game would be, knowing nothing about how to just make like nurture that part of it at all, it's just remained shit. And there used to be so nice. You'd be like, oh, look, a new, a new like thing by an indie developer. Oh, what's the new iPhone game? And like now I don't think about playing a game on the iPhone more than once every 6 months.
Oh God, no. And same thing's happening on Steam now, which is so bizarre to see. Like, I don't understand how someone could see what happened on the App Store and be like, that's the model to follow. We should just make it like discoverability is impossible. If you're not in the top 10, then you might as well not exist at all. Like, it's I remember, 4 or 5 years ago, Steam was like, oh, if there was a game on Steam, that was going to be maybe it might not be your game, but it's probably a really good game. Yeah. And you knew that if you got a game on Steam, that was like a ticket. Like, people were going to play your game and you're going to make a ton of money. And now it's just dozens upon dozens upon dozens of games are getting released a day on Steam.
And I'll say, like, it's partially a good thing that like we're having like more developers being able to access a place like Steam, right? Like this kind of like front page of game development for PC. But the problem is it's not curated in any way. It's not moderated in any way. And in fact, it's going towards like less and less moderation and curation.
It's announced,
Yeah, just in the last, few weeks we've been talking about this kind of as an industry, I think. And I don't know, like, it's okay to have tons and tons of access to the platform for developers, but not when it turns into like this like raging, broiling sea of just awfulness. I don't know. It's like not even functional, in my opinion, as a dev.
I agree. And
I would not develop for it.
It's strange because I think that there are people out there who are very interested in curation, and they would make themselves available to Valve if, if they're like, hire me and I'll figure out how to make this work. Yeah. But Valve, they don't want that. They're like, we're going to take the 30% cut and we're going to put as little money into this as we can because that means the profit margin is that much bigger.
Could just make a tier, just a nice little Nintendo seal of quality, put it on there, and so people know, hey, Valve's picks, right? And
or even just like some basic filtration of like weird white supremacist games and like hyper violent, just not okay content. Like, that's all over the place. And I mean, besides even just like a quality bar, just like a basic, like, are you a decent human bar? Like, that would be great.
Real bummer. Well,
so that's why you go to Itch.io real quick. Just like Itch.io, like, what's up? Itch.io's like the best platform for like digital gaming, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
It's fantastic.
I mean, I've been locked into Steam for a while because I'm like, I got 100 games on there and I know I can get them back. And like,
for sure.
Do I want to, this, like, because I think about, with video games, well, I want to have them in 20 years and 30 years and 40 years, right? I'm like, what's going to be around? Well, Steam will probably still be around. Maybe I can still get that, download that executable. Maybe. A lot less likely than if I have a cartridge, but Steam's is the best bet to make. But in the last weeks, I have been like, let me get that Itch.io app.
Yeah, I will say Itch.io has like a lot of the same kind of like features where you can download the game if you've purchased it, but you can like re-download it if you move to a new computer and things. So it has a lot of that same kind of like longevity focused stuff. And also I've found developers who release on Itch.io tend to be better about making sure their games are like archived properly or like updated into the future. So anytime I want to buy a game, especially if it's like indie or like some kind of mid-sized game, I will check Itch.io first to make sure am I able to buy it there. If not, I guess I'll buy it from Steam, right? So,
so yeah, talk a little bit more about the environment at that mobile game studio, because you're like, okay, it's kind of precarious, and they're not, they're in this sort of Wild West, and like, where's the money coming from? What does that mean as a work environment?
It means like pretty much the management class in the studio is very hostile to their workers, which is pretty understandable. Like, that happens in corporations all the time, where it's like, if the money is unstable, then every little problem with the company, every little perceived inefficiency, every little, kickback on an asset or whatever is like an opportunity to essentially attack the artist who worked on it, or the designer who, reviewed it or whatever, because the people in charge are worried about, their bottom line, but like, to an extreme extent, that's like definitely not responsible. It just adds a lot of undue pressure on the developers actually working in the space.
Did you go on to work there like after the internship?
Yes, I did. I maybe shouldn't have, but it gave me a lot of good kind of introductory production experience. And, again, living in LA, you got to kind of do what you got to do to like make rent. And I was very fortunate to be able to make rent with a job and also, be building that career portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, you're I mean, that's what your early working years are like, right?
Yeah.
You're just like, I gotta
You gotta
go
do
with
something.
what's working.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the only you're going to get to somewhere from where you are, and you have to keep expanding where you are and hope it takes you to the next spot. But
like, frankly, like, as a young developer, you don't have a lot of options. Like I mean, you mentioned something, Steve, about like a shotgun approach, where you're just like firing off resumes, even though maybe you went to a good school for game design or game art or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Like, the main issue kind of behind the lack of jobs for new game devs coming out of school, or, even not even coming out of school, but just entering the industry. The issue is, like, essentially the industry burns through its workers every like 5 to 6 years, right? Like, we've heard this kind of number. And that means like it's just like churning and burning talent, and you might be able to land 1 or 2 okay gigs, but they're going to be terrible, and they're going to like drive you into the ground, and then you're going to burn out, and then that means there's no older workers to like support you.
There's no old wisdom in the industry.
Yeah, there's a total like brain drain from like generation of dev to generation of dev.
I've only heard this recently. There was that Ars piece a couple weeks ago, right?
Right.
Am I right about that?
Yeah, I think that's where it was.
And it was just about how at conferences and things like that, it's like, there's very few people like in their 40s or 50s like who are on the panels or going to the panels or anything like that.
Yeah, I would go to meetups when I was still working remotely, and it was all young devs, and there was like 1 or 2 people there who were in their late 40s, early 50s, and they had stories about what the industry was like in the 90s, and it was it was really interesting to hear them talk about that. But for the most part, it was just people my age, or in their at most in their mid 30s, and you could see that those guys were like
ready to go.
Yeah, I think I'm done with games. I'm going to go work in something else.
It's super true. Yeah. I mean, what is it? The IGDA kind of like games industry survey that they do every like year, and then they have like a larger edition every 5 years.
What's the IGDA? That's the Developers Association?
Sorry, yeah. So the IGDA is the International Game Developers Association, which originally started as kind of an advocacy group for workers, and then quickly kind of turned more into a corporate advocacy group, even though it's like the IGDA, the Game Developers Association. It's kind of a misnomer in my opinion. But yeah, they do these surveys every year and every 5 years. And the most recent one, I don't remember quite the right numbers, but it was something like 13% of the game industry workforce was like 35 and above, or 45 and above. Either way, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like 13% is like not a young dev.
Yeah, I mean, that's like 13% of your workers have kids, basically, like,
right?
or own a home.
Yeah.
Or not to say that those are things that necessarily happen when you turn 35, but it's like
sure.
To put that in perspective, right? Like that's like a very that's a very small part of your population that is like going through those life stages.
I had an interesting realization yesterday, actually, which is the studio I'm at now kind of prides itself on saying like, oh, you can have a family and still work here. I work.
Oh wow, that's generous.
Yeah.
Strange.
I work with a lot of fathers, but I realized I don't work with any mothers at all. Like there are women at the studio, but I can't think of a single person who like had a kid and then came back who, wasn't a dad, which kind of makes me wonder like what. I mean, I think it's kind of obvious, like, if you're a dad and you have a kid, like, there's the social expectation that you'll keep working versus the mom staying at home. But I wonder, like, is the studio not even trying to bring those people back in? So,
I mean, in a lot of industries, companies actively do push away any women who, like, are on parental leave. And then whether or not they want to come back, often companies are kind of hostile to people coming back, typically. Yeah. And then in the games industry, there's also kind of like, added benefits of like, if you're a woman in the games industry, not only is like your workplace typically extremely dominated by men and also actively kind of hostile in its like workplace culture, also like your consumer base is often particularly hostile to like female developers and really just any developer who's not pretty much like a straight cis white dude. But so like just working in games is hostile for women in general. So, adding on something like coming back from parental leave makes it particularly difficult in this industry.
Well, so Steve, you I assume went on to not work out of your bedroom.
That is correct.
You work and now in offices, I suppose.
Yeah, I finished that project out, and they offered to hire me full time, but I had a couple weeks beforehand applied to this other studio, basically as a joke. I was like, I'm not going to get into this studio, and that studio got back and was like, hey, we want to interview. So I told the guys I'd contracted for, like, thanks for the project, I'm out.
Based on the interview.
Yeah, based on the interview, because I came down to the area and I went to the studio and I was like, man, this is crazy. And this is a studio whose games I'd been playing since I was, like 8 or 9. Like, this was one of those studios that people dream about working at.
Right.
And that alone, that in addition to like meeting the person who would be my lead and being like, oh wow, this person's really cool, I get along with him well, I was like, even though they haven't told me I got the job yet, I should hold out for this one. Yeah. So I did, and a couple weeks later they got back to me and they were like, yeah, we want you on. And I freaked out and I was like, awesome. I packed everything up. I moved down to Southern California and I started at that studio.
Is that where you are now?
Yes.
Cool. So what well, let me ask, like, what is that environment like vis-a-vis, you said, oh, they're trying to, they have the, we'll edit out all my hemming.
Yeah.
So you just said they pride themselves in saying, oh, you can have a family here.
Yes.
Do you feel that it is, better than, are you like, oh man, I'm lucky to be at this spot, or?
Yeah, that's a funny one. I feel conflicted because in many ways the studio does live up to its promises. They at least on the projects that I've worked on and with the people that I've worked on within the studio, work-life balance is valued pretty highly. They, like my lead, who's been my lead basically since I started there, I think I spent like 42 or 43 hours there instead of 40 for the week, and he was like, Steve, do we need to like figure out how to balance your workout? Like, this is too much.
Oh wow, okay.
There is a very like supportive environment to if you have an issue with your work schedule or like with your project, then the studio will try and accommodate for that. That being said, it's not perfect. And when things happen, there's a part of me that feels guilty for saying like, oh, like this studio is so great, but I just saw something bad happen and I want to leave or whatever. Like, how can I say that? This is like the one good studio in the industry. Like, if I leave, it's only going to get worse. But then again, like bad things happen. I'll work with people who are toxic, who encourage toxic environments. I've been on projects that decisions were made that were clearly aimed at short-term gain to the cost of all the developers that were on the project. And it's strange to see those things happen because I'm like, wait a minute, isn't this supposed to be the good studio?
Yeah, and like oftentimes I feel like people are like, well, I work at a studio that I really like, or like they pay overtime, which is like super rare in the industry somehow. And like, yeah, someone will be like, I don't know if a union's right for me because like unionization is like for people who either, don't get paid enough or like they have like dangerous working conditions. And it's like, a union isn't just to, remedy those kinds of things. It's also like, even if you have a great workplace, those benefits that you have in your job and in your position, they are only at the behest of whatever your company wants to bestow you, essentially. So a union's a good way to kind of just like guarantee and like actually codify those nice benefits, those nice kind of like working conditions and things.
Yeah, I know that things are good for me only because they are like overwhelmingly great for the executives.
Yeah.
And the executives are... Someone has convinced the executives that if they treat their workers well, they'll make more profit.
Yeah.
But if someone else convinces them that it would behoove them to treat their workers poorly, or if the executive board or whatever changes and people
They're all
come
fired, new people come in.
Then that would change, just flip of a switch. There's nothing preventing the working conditions from going into the toilet.
Right. I always think of that thing, working at College Humor for a long time, which is part of a, big conglomerate, and there's different levels of it, that I started to see how, and College Humor never got particularly bad, but how a change at the top would trickle down, ping pong, ping pong, ping pong. Like someone's, the CEO of the conglomerate made a decision about how the quarterly returns of the parent company didn't look so good, which caused a turnover in the CEO, which caused them to bring in someone new, which means that all of us are working different hours, kind of thing.
Yeah,
I remember the studio made a high level decision, and everyone I talked to was like, "This is the stupidest thing in the world, and in like a year it's going to bite us in the ass." And for the next year people talked about how this is going to bite us in the ass, this is going to bite us in the ass. A year came by and they were like, oh, we have to like get rid of a bunch of people or whatever. And it's like, wow, everyone saw this coming. Like, why did we let this happen?
Well, so I will say, though, because it does sound like you've got a pretty good workplace. And, I did at College Humor, too. And we also talked about unionizing at College Humor when I was a writer there. Yeah, the WGA East tried to organize
Oh, I'm not surprised. Those guys are super on it.
Oh, yeah, they are. This was actually a couple years before they had a lot of success unionizing all of the, the sort of digital publishing things. They were trying to do comedy on the East Coast. And so they went to like College Humor and the Onion and places like that, and they just I was for it at the time, and not everybody on the staff was, and part of it was that like our jobs were good. I mean, I was like I had benefits, 401k, like I was making a middle class income in New York City, which was nothing to sneeze at, and so was everybody, and it was a genuinely good workplace.
So why complain, right? Why like put up some like stink about forming a union?
A little bit of that, a little bit of that, and it was also like there was an effect. The union came in kind of hot, and some of the people were just kind of like, like just they were like, wait, who are these people? Why do they want me to do this so bad? What's going on? I don't know if I like this. No, I don't like it. No, not for me. And just like a little bit of a gut reaction.
Sure.
So I can relate to that of being in a place where I was like, well, yeah, this could be better, but I've got my gripes with it. But I know that anecdotally, or from what I understand, the reason I was so excited to talk to you guys is I know that in the broader games industry, like things are much worse.
Yes,
and that
absolutely.
And so what are the things that are causing there to not be 35-year-olds at your meetup, or that are causing your like a group like yours to sort of get traction?
Gosh, I mean, where do you start? The games industry is pretty messed up.
Yeah, it's we could just go down bullet points.
Yeah, I mean, lack of like proper healthcare coverage for people. I mean, there's like just endless crunch throughout the industry.
So what is crunch? I know what it is, but I hope that I wish we had gotten to this before minute 43 of the interview. This is almost like the headline is. But I will preface that in my intro and tell people to stick around for minute 43 when we find out what crunch is.
Crunch. TM is essentially overtime work at extreme lengths of periods of time. So essentially, like crunching is like overtime work for a period of like a month to 3 months to 6 months to 9 months to whatever the absurd decisions of management have put you under.
Like,
so
what kind of overtime are we talking?
Oh, easily like anything from like 10, 12, 14, 16-hour days, depending on where you're working.
Yeah.
16-hour days for
There are
for 6
documented
months on
cases of
end?
16-hour days for like 3 or 4 months. Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
And often, many studios, some studios are better, like Steve's studio, and actually my studio as well, but a lot of studios don't even pay that overtime. They don't, add any additional pay for that.
They're just like, hey, you're getting your $40K a year no
That's
matter what.
pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
if you make enough to be salaried, then overtime isn't a thing as far as they're concerned.
Right?
Yeah, like
Right.
you have your salary, just get the work done.
But that salary is for 40 hours a week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
no, it's-
Ultimately, crunch is someone said we can make this game in a year, and it turns out to take 2 years. They realize that 3 months before it's out. So, like,
Yeah.
all right, let's fit the next year and 3 months of work in
Right.
3 months.
Yeah.
But that quickly, I mean, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but that quickly becomes a business model, right? Once
Yes.
you've
Oh,
got, like,
absolutely.
okay,
It's expected.
we got 100 people, so you're sitting out there, you made one game that way. Oh, fuck, things went south, and on this game, we had to cram a year of work into 3 months, and then you go back up in your manager's office, and you're like, oh, we just got 100 people to do a year's worth of work in 3 months, and like,
Maybe we could do that again.
Then we do that again. Like, well, yeah, we got that buffer. Well, let's hope we don't have to do it again. But and then
No, it's
by
super real.
by game number 5, you're like, that's how we do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like the role of like a CEO, the role of like your managers and like people in charge of companies is to cut costs, save profits, and like or make profits, and then like essentially just be beholden to their shareholders.
Yeah.
And that means like often taking a lot of away from like the quality of life of the workers, whether it's unpaid overtime or just crunching for long periods of time,
Yeah,
what have you.
There's a mentality, like the argument will be made like, oh yeah, we have to crunch, but just this once. The problem is that if you do it once, you've shown the people who make decisions that that's a
You've already
viable
lost the
business decision.
negotiation. Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. And a lot of people throw crunch around and like unpaid overtime as like the main thing to fight in games. But like there's just so much more that a union can do. And I mean, one of the things I often say to people is like, games is like the worst of both worlds for like the tech sector and entertainment, like film and television, because you have like film, you have like these like short periods of time where you have these projects that like ramp up. A lot of people get hired,
Yep.
and at the end of the project, everyone gets fired again, right? But the problem is we don't have that union coverage to support us in the meantime, and people aren't paid in the for their overtime work, which means they can't stack up a little bit of extra cash to make it from from one project to the next project.
And in the entertainment industry, I mean, look, so my other interest in this is I work in TV. LA, I'm very lucky to be a union town.
Yeah.
And I'm aware also from, hearing about this, like how lucky I am and how much that is the only reason that anyone is compensated appropriately. And the biggest thing that the guilds do is that if you work on, all the writers on my show who are WGA, they will earn enough credits that they'll have health insurance for a year.
Yep.
And that'll cover, it usually takes about 6 months. People work on a show for 4 months, then they look for the next job for 6 months, and then they work on another show for 4 months. That's just how the industry works. And then so you have health insurance for the full calendar year afterwards.
Yeah.
So you've got like a year buffer to find your next.
Yeah, there's
next
nothing
gig.
like that in games as far as I know. Like you
Not
work
at
the
all.
project, and if you're fired afterwards, that's it.
And hopefully you scrimped enough personally just to squeak by. That's it.
And hopefully the next job you find is in the same city, so you don't have to go move and find another one.
There's just a huge kind of community of people who just like float from like not just like city to city, like working at different studios, but like country to country.
That's crazy.
Because
You're
like
moving from city to city.
there's just no stability at all, and there's no upward mobility within a studio.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people really would love the idea of like picking a studio and really investing in it and like building a career out of that one house, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the opportunity that we have. Like nobody really gets like proper raises. No one really gets proper like promotions in the games industry. You have to jump from position to position around around from different studios.
So who's staying at the studios? Is it just like the like leads and the management?
So it's pretty much just like if you manage to stick it out for long enough, you will become a lead or management, which like is kind of bad also for people who want to just work at one place long term. Like I know plenty of people who are like art directors or art leads who don't want to be art directors or art leads. They just happen to be the senior person in that department. They really just want to be a very, very good environment artist or like a character modeler or something.
I know people who wanted to do that. They were like, I want to be senior. I want to get paid well. But I just want to make assets. And it's like, no, you have to manage people now.
Yes. They turn everyone into some form of like pseudo manager or producer or supervisor.
There's a certain, I mean, that makes a slight amount of sense. Like on our set, I'm sorry I'm going to be comparing everything to TV.
That's
but
fair.
like, you know, like our senior, you know, hair department person like hires the other hair department people, and you know, there's like a little bit of, it makes sense. It's like, yeah, you're building the team, right?
No, of course, and that does make sense. And a lot of people will want to, you know, progress to those kind of more like head of a department roles. Like that's very common. The problem is like the people who do end up in these kind of lead roles in the games industry often aren't there by merit. Even if they are senior, it's just
they stuck around.
They just happen to stay there for 10 years and now they're there.
And there isn't the role for the person who's like a wizard but cannot manage people and like can't talk to anybody but is just like great, because that person never gets a senior role basically.
Yeah, they'll jump around from position to position, probably not rising too much.
Yeah, they'll be the one engineer who knows how to do like this part of networking or whatever. So they'll go do it for one studio and it's like, all right, you have the code, I'm going to go do it for another studio or something.
So is it like when we're talking about you know, a big new AAA game comes out, and is it like how much of the workforce of, you know, God of War, right, Call of Duty, whatever?
Oh God!
Right,
I'm glad you brought up God of War.
I was gonna say, don't get me started on Sony Santa Monica.
Oh,
like,
okay.
Yeah,
I didn't even have a specific opinion about the.
That's why you've got
about
us
the studio.
here.
So someone at the studio, I forget who, recently came out and said like, yeah, we crunched for 5 years to make this game. Like at that point, crunch is not a temporary thing. Crunch is, well, we're a studio that does 80-hour work weeks or whatever. Yeah. Which is like, I think that's a failure. As well as that game has received reviews and is, you know, critically praised, that is not an example of a game that we should be making.
Absolutely.
I played that game. It was very nice. I don't need those people to work that long to make that game.
You didn't want people to die to make that game.
It would be fine for Dark Souls 1, but not for God of War. God of War wasn't. I'm just joking. It wouldn't be fine for anything.
No, of course not. And like, I actually have friends who have like now developed like PTSD and various like mental illnesses from that experience, actually specifically working on that game.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this kind of stuff is rampant throughout the industry, and there's no support for these kinds of people. And like, oh, Steve, you just said something about like, it was like poor management. If you have like ended up in a situation where your studio is pulling 80-hour
5
weeks,
years of poor management.
Yeah, that's seriously just poor management. And I say that as a producer, like essentially the management, like the highest management class in the games industry. If your team is crunching for months and months and months, you are a bad producer. Yeah. You're a bad manager. You have not structured your production timeline well.
I think that's absolutely true. I will say that I have seen producers who didn't want to have to do that, but it was mandated that they need this much content needed to be made in this amount of time. Yeah. And they had no choice but to say, artist, you have to make this number of characters.
That's my question is how much of it's that, because again, to just draw from my own experience, you know, I've been doing my own show we're on our 4th year, and you know, when we started, and I've seen this happen to other people on other shows, you start and the network says, we need it by this date and it's got to cost this much, and everyone says, yes sir, thank you sir, you know. And you know, that results in bad, you know, because it's like the network makes that demand. They don't know what it takes to make a television show. None of them have any idea.
They're not there in the daily reality and realizing like, oh shit, we're going to come in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months late.
Yeah, and they don't know what they're doing to people, right? Yeah. And you've got this intermediary company. It's not the network doing it to their own people. They're hiring a production company that's then paying, that's then scrambling to figure it out.
For sure.
And I realized in the first year, I was like, oh, this is how bad TV gets made. When people say, why is TV bad? All the people on it were good. All the writers are good. Why is it bad? It's because of that mismatch. And it's because people were like working those crazy hours, and like, you know, they try to shoot way too much on a day, and they could only get one take of that shot, and like the script script didn't get enough revisions. They were rewriting it on set, yada, yada. And so then every year after that, I was like, okay, I'm going to be widening the window of what we can do. I'm going to like set up new stuff of like, I'm not doing that again because, you know, that was like too hard on my staff.
For sure.
I'm not taking responsibility for it. And so if we're going to do this again, we have to do it, you know, like this or like this. And then we widen that a little bit every year. And now in our fourth year, it's like, okay, now the show feels comfortable to make, you know? And, you know, sometimes we hear like, couldn't you guys make the show a little faster and a little cheaper? And I'm like, no, can't do that again because last year, all my staff quit.
Yeah.
Everybody quit. Nobody came back because of that. But there are other production companies that don't do that. And they don't, you know, they don't take responsibility for that. They just keep saying, yes, sir, thank you, sir, forever. And so it never gets any better. And you hear about those shows, people say, oh my God, don't work on that. You know, like this thing, you know, their entire shows that have been running for decades that run that way. That, you know, these would be the things that I won't, you know, name names about.
For sure. I mean, back when I was, you know, trying to get jobs in the film industry and TV industries, like, yeah, I mean, there were often, you know, kind of whisper networks being like, hey, I know they offered you a job at such and such production studio, but seriously, do not take that. It's not worth the title. It's not worth the position or experience. And the same thing is true in games. Like, I can't tell you how many people I've warned away from certain studios that either I've had bad experiences at or friends of mine have had bad experiences at. The problem is there's no real way to, like, publicly share that information in a safe way. It's all these whisper networks, and by definition, a whisper network is going to leave out the most vulnerable people, the people who aren't in the know, right? Yeah. Like the people who don't have like social connections, the people who are like super new to the industry or like easily exploitable. Yeah. And so it's just there are no current good solutions to these kind of
there's no
rampant
like
problems.
RateMyGameStudio.com or anything. I mean, there's like Glassdoor or whatever, but those
that's not enough.
Yeah, it's not.
Glassdoor is, I don't know what that site is, but occasionally pops up when I'm Googling stuff and I'm like, these ratings are clearly meaningless.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And half the time, like at least in my experience looking at Glassdoor, it's like mostly angry people who didn't get the job. And it's like,
well, it's that, I forget, like the bias of if you're on there writing a review, it's either because you had a really good time or a really bad time, and you're probably not the average experience.
Yeah. Well, so I guess my point with that last point is that like you kind of can't, as a worker, like trust the management of the company that you're working for. I mean, hopefully, at a better place, you're like, okay, they don't put those pressures on the like perhaps like at your workplace, there's less of that.
Well, no, it still happens quite a bit. I mean, I've other people on my team, like there's miscommunication or misunderstanding between the artists and the engineers about how much time it takes for like. An artist will be like, why didn't the engineer make that program or add that feature for it yet? And it's because that takes like 6 months, not like 2 weeks, let alone, you know, the executive board or management or people who aren't doing game dev work. They're doing managerial work. I don't expect those people to understand like how long it takes to make the game. Workers need to understand that an executive isn't going to be like, oh yes, like I understand that it's going to take you this much time to make the game. They're just going to say like, make the game and do it quick because I make more money if you do it quick.
So we need like a collective hand kind of like helping also guide these decisions.
Yeah, I mean, that's
almost like if we united in some way.
Game workers
some
uniting.
Some kind of union of workers.
Well, I think what you're getting at, what that makes me think of is, and what I learned in my own experience is you have to advocate for yourself.
Yes.
Like I would try to say to the people above me or the people who are making, or, you know, like, please understand what it takes to make this. And I would just before you ask me, think about it in your head and figure it out. And then they just couldn't. They just be like, no, my boss is telling me I need this by this date. And so you need to give me that by that date. And eventually I was like, oh, I need to start saying no. And I'm in a rare position where I'm in the pivot point and I can like sort of control that either way. But most people are not. And that's where I think collective, like speaking as a collective, comes from.
Absolutely. I'm empowered to say no uniquely in my role, and I'm still terrified every time I do it because I think either I'm going to piss off the people that I work with, or I'm going to piss off my lead or my manager, or I'm going to piss off the guy who decides whether or not I get a raise. Like, it's terrifying to push back. I very often just like, you know what, I'm just going to work harder and get the work done because that's the least stressful outcome.
I mean, as an individual, you just quite seriously do not have any proper leverage to, negotiate on those situations, whether it's just saying no to something or asking for an extended deadline. You just do not have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in an industry where nobody's there past 35 anyway, that means there's an enormous number of new meat coming in, and they can just toss you on the pile.
I will say, actually, Steve and I were talking about this recently, like, even though like the industry very much does like churn and burn a lot of like new young talent to kind of fuel these like extremely bad labor practices for the sake of profit, game developers have a highly developed skill set. You simply cannot work in games without knowing the entire production pipeline. You can't make a single art asset without knowing the context of the asset, how that's going to be interacted with the player character, how the engineer is going to have to implement that. You can't write a single line of dialogue for a game without knowing exactly what the narrative design is going to be, exactly how it's implemented, what's the procedure for localization, how do we prep for that. Like every role in a game's development life cycle is like incredibly connected to the rest.
I think the misconception that game developers are easily replaceable comes from the time when it took like 12 people to make a AAA game, if AAA really existed back in that day,
quote unquote.
Yeah. Nowadays the roles are so specialized and require so much training in terms of the software that you're using and the techniques that you're going to be using, and just like working in code bases that other people have written. It is, having worked in the industry for frankly not that long at this point, just a couple of years, I don't feel like they could just throw me out and bring in some newbie off the street.
They'd have to onboard for like weeks and months, perhaps even.
Absolutely. It would cost them, tens of thousands of dollars at bare minimum to get someone to the same point. But there's still this cultural like assumption that we're easily replaceable because so many people want to work in the games industry. It's this insanely profitable and not glamorous, but it's it's cool. It's cool to make video games. Yeah. So
and that coolness and that passion and that interest people have coming into the industry is exactly the fuel that employers need to burn them out without proper pay. Because
hey, we're all so passionate.
We have stars in our eyes, right? And you'll do what it takes to like finally make something that's like at E3 or something, right? Like you finally see it on those press conference like stages and you're like, holy shit, like I'm in the games industry. But you're being exploited. You can barely afford rent. You're like not able to have like an actual social life, or let alone like a family. Like that's not a thing.
We have that in comedy too. Like everyone is everyone works in comedy for 10 years for free before you get your first gig, right? I got my first paying gig at like 29, and my first like union gig, like TV gig at like 32. Right. And so you're like, oh my god, if I could only be close to like, touch Andy Samberg's flannel shirt or whatever, But then the culture is people know as soon as you get that job, oh, you're bringing me back for a year or two. I want a big bump, there's a culture of, okay, I got an agent. I could go work somewhere else. I've worked once. I can work anywhere else. I've got a union. And so, I've seen it. I've seen it happen, and I'm proud of people when they do it. When they say, they get their first job, and then the next year they're like, "I know my value, motherfucker. Pay me what I'm worth, and don't treat me like this or like that."
There's none of that in games.
No, and in fact, I feel like the culture of games encourages people to feel starry-eyed way longer than they should, and feel like they're lucky to be there way longer than they should. You have people who've been in the industry for half a decade who are still like, "Wow, this is amazing." When the reality is like, yeah, it's amazing, but think about how much money you make your boss. A guy like Bobby Kotick, the CEO of Activision Blizzard King, made something like $30 million last year in compensation, which was 300 times the median salary of an ABK employee. That I mean, maybe someone wants to argue that he provided 300 times the worth, or
I think not.
Yeah, I did the math. You would have to work for Bobby Kotick for almost 4 lifetimes to make the money that he made in a year, and it's there's this weird disjointness of how much money is flowing into the industry. It's so much bigger than many of the entertainment industries. And I was looking at like stock figures because I was really curious about this. If in 2012 you had invested in ABK, you would have 6 times the amount of money that you had invested.
Oh, wow.
That's better than Amazon or Netflix or Apple. Like if you invested in Apple, you're a chump. You should have invested in Ubisoft or ABK or EA.
Yeah.
There is so much money flowing into this industry, and yet there's still this immature sort of culture of, hey, we're just like scrappy teams putting in the long hours and making art.
Yeah.
And it's
We're
like,
just wearing ripped jeans and t-shirts and like doing our thing. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
this is a multi-billion-dollar industry
It is
across the
wild.
globe.
Yeah, I mean, it makes, well, I don't know if it makes more money than movies, but like I know certainly
does.
So
it absolutely does.
Collectively,
Tens
it
of
does.
billions of
Yes.
dollars.
And you know, people say, well, video games are incredibly hard to make, which I believe. You know, incredible number of artists working years on end to like make these things, and it's like it's hard to imagine a more complex entertainment product, except maybe for movies, which like you know are
will say
simpler
I've
in
worked
some
with-
ways, but.
I've worked with a ton of producers in games who come from film or come from even VFX, which is like a nightmare of a production schedule. I mean, VFX companies like close so quickly because they just get run into the ground.
Yeah.
But like they will say like working in film was like a vacation because like I don't know, like it's just the labor conditions are not the same. Like even though like working in film is tough and like it's you know long hours sometimes and like it's also fueled off of passion in a lot of ways. But games is just a behemoth. Like,
But also, like the reason for that is because of the unions that made it made it like a reasonable place to work.
absolutely,
Like,
it'd be a nightmare without the unions.
like my exactly. Like shooting. You know, I just shoot a television show, but you know, every moment of our day is planned out. You've got 20 people who are working. Oh, sorry, 20 is way too few. You've got like over 100 people who are working very precisely. Everybody has to be doing everything by the minute. And then if you're on the Avengers, that's that times 1,000.
Of
right?
course.
But everything runs on the union schedule, right? Like there's the lunch breaks are union mandated, stuff like that. Like you can't have people work past a certain amount of time. And it's like
12 hours typically.
Yeah, and those are exactly. And those are there's decades and decades and decades of that rhythm is just built into the rhythm of the industry, right?
Yep.
Like that sort of labor considerations.
And it's accounted in the production schedules of projects.
And like if you can imagine shooting what it would be like shooting the Avengers if that didn't exist, I think we would maybe be like I'm saying like
absolutely.
It would be close to video games, right?
Yes.
Like you can see how it's possible to make something that complicated and that time intensive, and it's got to be out, blockbuster weekend, or else everybody dies.
And like, exactly. That's exactly the vibe we have in games. And like, like a blockbuster film is a great example because like it's not just even one like production studio; it's often multiple in concert. And then you've got like all these vendors you're reaching out to for VFX or audio design or whatever, right? 3D texturing, even just like a whole house for 3D texturing for Avengers. And we have the same stuff in games. I work on a AAA project right now that's like taking up my whole time, and we have like somewhere around 3 or 4 vendors for like outsourcing like models and animation or like turnarounds on characters and just like environmental art and like it's just this massive hulking behemoth with not just one production company or one studio. It's like all these interweaved connecting people, and all of them are getting screwed over by their bosses.
Yes.
So
well, so let's talk about like what you guys are actually doing at Game Workers Unite to try to like ameliorate this. I mean, I didn't go to many E3 events. I actually only went to literally one.
I respect that, by the way.
Well, I wanted to go. This is so fun. Our production office is above where the PlayStation event was being held. It was on our lot, and we saw like the stage being built, and I was like, I would like to go, but I had an invite to go see. Also, someone sent me an invite to go see like the Cyberpunk demo, and I was literally, I'm working on my show, I can't go. But I went to I went to like the Indie Mix event, and I saw
it's a lovely place.
It was a very nice event.
I demoed there a couple years ago. It was really
you did?
nice. It's a nice, small, intimate one.
Yeah, it was really nice. It was like on a rooftop, and it was cool. But I saw your flyers everywhere.
Yeah, and our stickers were on like almost every poster.
Yeah,
it's really exciting.
So what are you guys doing?
I mean, so like primarily like we're so like often people are like, so what are you going to do? Just like form a union and then that's great and like everything's fixed. It's like that's 1,000% not how this works. There's let's say there's 1,000 steps to unionization. We're on 2 or 3 right now.
Yeah.
Just starting the conversation is what number one goal is for us right now. Getting literature out there, educating workers in the industry about not just how their labor conditions are terrible, which a lot of people are familiar with, but also what your actual legal rights are. A lot of people don't understand the legal concept of a union and what it actually is, and that they can't be fired for they legally, at least in the United States and a lot of other places, you literally cannot be fired for talking about unionizing or collective bargaining and things like that. And just educating the industry as a whole, because there's a total lack of knowledge about this subject.
Yeah.
And frankly, every single person I've talked to with literally 3 exceptions has been pro-union once I talk to them about the issues of at hand and what it actually means to be a union.
Yeah.
Right?
For me, I've sort of been at work trying to suss out can I talk to this person about unions? Is this going to bite me in the ass? And everyone I've talked to has said I realize there are problems in this industry. I don't think they're going to be solved. I don't think they can be, or oh, it's just not realistic. And I think the primary goal of Game Workers Unite right now is to show people that it's not absurd to start this journey, to just get people together, make them understand other people want this. If you feel like the industry is treating you unfairly, you're not the only one who feels that way. There are other people who feel that way, and the only way things are going to change is if these people get together and agree to make certain decisions.
Absolutely. Right. And it's not just some kind of leftist thing. It's not, people who are just liberal or something in the common sense. I have tons of libertarian friends and conservative friends in the industry who are also pro-union, once they kind of talk to us and actually hear us out, because the conditions are just so bad. It's really easy actually to bond with people over this stuff. I mean, I've never worked at a studio where we didn't go out to a bar or dinner after work and people weren't just
griping,
and complaining about their conditions. It's a thing you can really bond over with your coworkers.
Just laughing, and it's why are we laughing about this? This is horrible.
Let's maybe do something about that. So a lot of what we're doing is kind of 3 things really right now. One, we're doing a lot of the educational outreach. We're developing a lot of literature and distributing it at kind of high profile industry events and things. Right. And also we're developing literature for game development educational programs, so that teachers and students can actually incorporate some of this into their curriculum, so people are actually prepared as they enter the industry.
So for the school that you went to.
Sure.
I think that would have been immensely useful if someone at that school had taken the time to say, hey, here are what the conditions are going to be like, and here are some things that you might be able to do to help fix it. Yeah, nobody talks about that.
Not once in a class in 4 years did they ever say this is what the day-to-day actual reality is like. Here's what the average conditions are like. It could be one day in game development 101, first day, just hey guys. Yeah. It's not that great.
And you were at a school that was explicitly trying to funnel you into that industry.
Yeah. I mean, it was more here are the technical skills, not here's the reality.
Wow.
If anything, if they'd showed you that, people might have left. People have been holy crap, this is horrible.
Of course. That's true. But I mean, it's educating students is really important to us because, having that transition of mindset between I'm a fan of games, I really love games, I'm going to school for games, it's so exciting, and then being a worker, transitioning smoothly into I understand that conditions are going to be poor, but here's what I can do about it. That's super important. And people need that kind of crossfade into that mindset of being I'm not a game fan anymore, I'm a worker.
Yeah, understanding that you have the power to affect the industry at that point, because you're providing labor to the industry. You're not just paying them money.
For sure.
So.
Yeah, so, sorry, again, the 3 main things we're kind of doing right now is, 1, that educational outreach. 2, we're developing a lot of, local chapters. You may have heard, we've been talking about it on Twitter, and, it's on our website. We have lots of local chapters popping up around various cities that have, larger game development populations in multiple countries. We have, groups in the United States and Canada, but also we have folks in Italy and Spain and Brazil and Australia, one's coming in Japan, which is really exciting, Germany as well, UK. So we're trying to get people on the ground getting involved in their actual local communities, because unionization can't be a top-down effort. It has to come from the people in their studios, in their towns, with their peers and coworkers.
Yes.
Right.
And empowering them with like basic tools and like, understanding their rights and just getting people together in a room, like that's really powerful. So like that's like super important to us. And then 3, we've been like building a lot of working relationships with existing labor organizations, both traditional in terms of like unions and things like SAG-AFTRA or IATSE.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Yeah, IATSE and SAG have been really wonderful. We've spoken with Writers Guild East and places or groups outside of the United States as well. But like also, non-traditional labor organizations, places like coworker.org, which is kind of like, it's not like a unionization like tool, but it's like a community where like people can host like anonymous petitions against their companies and get like employee signatures that are verified by coworker.org. And it's been actually really successful for Starbucks employees.
I never heard of this.
Yeah, it's like super interesting. Coworker.org, people should check it out. And we've been talking to them about, how we could host like campaigns on there and things. So, kind of trying to find multiple approaches from like people who have a lot of like really nice institutional experience and knowledge. And, really, turning our movement and our message into something that's like truly sustainable and we can really grow and develop off of, not just, a talking point that, maybe there was like a Waypoint article at GDC, but like, actually building into like something tangible.
That's what blew my mind, because I found out about GW at GDC, and I attended the talk on unionization, and I was like, there were people there with flyers and the stickers and stuff.
And there were a lot of articles that came out of that. I read them on.
I was running around the conference all week talking to all those people.
Yeah.
It like literally, I went there on like with like a full access pass to like go to talks and like get better at like writing, which is like my personal thing, and then production. And I did nothing. I saw one talk the entire conference because like Polygon, Waypoint, Kotaku, everyone was like, "What the hell is happening?" We have not seen like such a visible effort. With such a large kind of like group backing it in terms of unionization.
Yeah, I mean, there have been murmurs in the industry for probably decades at this point.
For sure.
About like, maybe we should do something. But this is the first time where I have personally seen like a concerted effort to figure out how to do this correctly. Like the external resources like IATSE and SAG-AFTRA have been
incredibly helpful,
enormously valuable. It's like, wow, these are people who've actually done this before. Yeah. We have a guideline by which we can do it.
Right.
It's really important to have those people who've like gone before us to like help kind of lead us forward. And even though they might not know our particular industry, they can be like a massive resource for us. And in particular, IATSE and SAG and like the Writers Guild, I personally see them as like absolutely crucial to kind of our strategies moving forward in terms of unionizing a lot of these larger studios, these larger AAA studios, because a lot of like people, whether they're, there's a ton of voice actors in the industry who actually recently had a very successful strike effort that, was highly covered in the industry.
Yeah.
And like, that's like the first major
voice
labor
actors
win.
are covered by SAG.
Yes, they are. And like they won a lot of like new better working conditions and benefits for them in the industry. And so like working with them is absolutely crucial, and like getting like a proper foothold on some of these larger like huge commercial projects. Same thing with like writers who often like games writers many times come from like film or television or what have you, and they have experience in the past with like a unionized studio or something, right, where all their coworkers were union, and like they know how good it can be to be union, and now they work in games and they absolutely resent not having union. I can't tell you how many like writing kind of like colleagues who like will just complain about not being union. And like those people are crucial in terms of like getting those handholds on those studios and really starting those efforts.
And if one of those people, I mean, I don't know that much about it, but if like if you wanted Judd Apatow to write you a video game, and Judd Apatow said, well, it's got to be a union production, it would be, right? Go call the WGA and work out a little contract, and it doesn't got to be too crazy, but like I'm union, I'm not working without a union contract. It would be, if you were able to like sort of get that. Like it's about finding those leverage points.
Yeah, for sure. Those leverage points are really important, and like one of our main jobs right now is like identifying those kind of like first marks for studios, like who are the like parties involved that will like be most helpful in this cause. I mean, it's happening in effectively every AAA studio right now, people are having these conversations behind closed doors. People are slowly building their kind of like peer-to-peer kind of like trust-based networks of like, I know you're safe to talk about this with. Like, let's start reaching out to the people you trust as well, and like start building an actual group talking about this.
Yeah, and that effort is doubly necessary because we don't really have celebrities in the game industry. Like, you know, there's guys like Hideo Kojima, but for the most part, we can't rely on like a representative voice, some incredibly valuable individual to stand up and say like, hey, we're gonna like this is union now. We need to be union.
Like, is Miyamoto going to do that?
No.
I don't think so.
No, probably
Well, that's
not.
a whole other country.
That's true. But there are proud union labor traditions in Japan, actually, even though they're not, you know, well known to us maybe. I don't know. Like, there's an opportunity there, but we lack celebrities who can like be a super visible front for this, maybe.
Yeah, which makes it all the more important that we act collectively. Like as an individual saying like, oh, like unions are a great idea. I'm going to wait for it to happen and then I'll join. Like,
don't do that.
Yeah, that's not going to work. It has to be, you know, devs at a studio get together and they all agree that they're going to unionize. And I think that there's going to be a flashpoint where some major AAA studio unionizes, and it's just like other AAA studios can't help but unionize.
It's been really instructive to me watching that happen in publishing on the East Coast,
right?
Because the same WGA East that I was talking about that was trying to do College Humor and The Onion and didn't really have a lot of traction. A couple of years later, suddenly they're all going boom, 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 boom.
Just dominoes falling right over.
Yeah, and even a couple, you know, after like the Gawker sites all, you know, was shut down after they unionized, I was like, ooh, is that going to be the end for that? And nope, the New Yorker just
keep fighting.
It was pretty, it's pretty wild. Well, let me ask this. I know that you said you're organized horizontally. You're you know, speaking with us here sort of pseudo-anonymously, and I just sort of want to ask, why is that an important part of how you guys are organized?
It's probably the most crucial thing about being involved with Game Workers Unite and any unionization effort. I mean, just talking from like the very beginning of labor history in the Western world, like, it is a dangerous, not safe practice. It's crucially important to people's well-beings. The American middle class was developed by unions and nobody else. They enabled like our, you know, relative stability and wealth in this country. But it's super dangerous. I mean, people get blacklisted out of our industry in particular. People get fired, even though it's illegal. They push them out in other ways, find other excuses to fire.
Yes.
Of course, yeah. And even that thing that you said, I've always been told, you can't be fired for talking about unionization.
But you can be fired for this one mistake that for some reason management's going to hold over you. Or like, more often than not, people are pushed out kind of socially, which actually happens to a lot of people, whether you're like queer or trans or a person of color or what have you, a woman. Often you're pushed out by culture, which is also a very active force. It's not a passive force.
It is. Games are still very much a boys' club in terms of management and leadership, and even if you have workers at like the staff level or even the senior level who are in an oppressed group, for instance, if they don't fit in with the culture, then the company might value their work as far as saying like, yes, come in and give us labor and we'll give you money. But the ability to affect the culture at the studio will be stunted because you're going to be pushing against a culture where most people are like, oh, like, why are you trying to raise a stink? Like, this company is fine the way it is. Yeah.
And often a lot of people who are hiring often think in terms of like finding a culture fit out of their candidates, and really what you need to be looking for is a culture add, like someone who will add to like the interesting perspectives and ideas, which will only make the games better and the teams work more efficiently and more, you know, well-roundedly. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of a bit of a tangent, but like
that culture
all these
fit
thing
is that's the worst way to hire.
Weird to
no,
see.
for sure.
Yeah.
It turns everyone into the same person.
Hire another person who like drinks IPAs and plays the same games and
that's
everything.
That's super real.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you just want more of the same person. That's really weird. It's like such a weird weird code.
Yeah.
People don't
Yeah.
realize what it's a code for, but it is
It's
used as a code
exclusion,
that way.
for sure.
Yes.
Before you said, "Oh, we don't have a representative," I was like, "Well, not having done this myself, right? Like, what would the strategy be? Wouldn't you want to be like, hey, I'm here on the battlements. Come join me. You guys all know
sure.
me. Come on."
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you do that publicly, I can understand what the consequences would be. It's more sort of that like garnering quiet support. It's more like, hey, you know me.
Exactly.
Like,
No,
We're pals.
that's exactly what it is.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's all about those peer-to-peer connections that you can really trust, another person to kind of talk about these issues.
Yeah.
I will say we have kind of a unique benefit in that the games industry is like, unlike a lot of industries, very present on things like Twitter, where not everyone is, public with their actual legal name on there, but they're known as like a such and such developer at such place, but they maybe have an anonymous name. And so people can spread a lot of information and stuff that way. Like, for instance, my Twitter handle is not my legal name. Otherwise, I would never talk about this kind of stuff on there.
Yeah.
And that really enables me to, in a way, kind of publicly help shape that discourse, help, get resources to people, actually talk about this in the light of day.
Yeah. Conversely, my Twitter handle is my real name, so I don't talk about this at all.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, I will say, like, something I've thought about is, recently, like, I would probably almost certainly drop my essentially current career in games to become a union organizer if this really did pick up some proper steam. Whether an existing union wanted to, develop an actual organizing branch for games and interactive entertainment, or what have you, I have considered, like actually just like stopping my work, because obviously I will be fired and I will be blacklisted if I put my name out there.
Yeah.
And it would be really cool to work on this as like a full-time gig. I mean, it kind of was a full-time gig for a few months.
I was going to say.
I was working 80-hour weeks on GWU for like a month or two.
You're
but-
crunching yourself.
No, it's true. And people are like, that's a little ironic, huh? Like, you're pretty much working yourself into the ground for this.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but like that work will hopefully enable just multitudes of people to have a better quality of life moving forward. And so it's like worth it in a sense.
Yeah. You're like, I'm passionate. I'm so passionate about it. So
No,
you
it's
trick
true.
yourself into it.
Maybe I'm just like petite bourgeoisie or something.
But also
No.
at the same time, I see why it makes sense to say, hey, no, this is a peer. This is not an organizer. This is someone who
it's important.
has my same, I mean, we talked at the beginning. You guys came from the same place as any developer.
Yeah, no, we have the same stories, as many people in the industry, and it's like we're just like you, but we're a little maybe more vocal about how grumpy we are.
Yeah.
We're taking the risk, I guess.
Yeah, and like I have several people in my studio who like they don't actually know that I'm a Game Workers Unite organizer, but just because I feel like that is maybe a step too far to associate myself directly with this org. But like when we talk about unionization, when we talk, whether we're walking to Ralph's for lunch or what have you, like we'll talk about these issues, and that's almost more valuable in many ways than some of the anonymous stuff I do online, right? It's really important to have those personal connections and like really talk about those things in a tangible way with your coworkers.
Yeah, it helps take the risk off. If you think you're the only person, you think this is incredibly risky, but as soon as you feel like you're part of a community of people who are fighting for the same goal, then we've distributed the load, as it were. So
Absolutely.
like I feel perfectly safe being part of GWU because of how many people are involved in it at this point.
No, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of, comfort and safety in numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the entire concept behind unionization, right?
Yeah.
Maybe alone we can't do much, but, two people can fight back to back through a crowd, three can make decisions.
Yep.
5 is a committee, and 12 is like an actual organization, right?
Can I just ask,
numbers.
How do you take that first step? Because I think, maybe there's some people listening to this who are in their own labor situation. Or I'll give another example. I'm active at the Upright Citizens Brigade, which
that's awesome.
is a theater that, doesn't pay its performers because they call it a school. But some of us, not everybody agrees with that. It's complex, and it's not entirely analogous, right? But
for sure,
there's constant talk about people going like, somebody should start maybe one day, maybe they will.
Someone should do something.
Yeah, exactly. There's just like, and everyone's sort of like, okay, but what?
How about you do something?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How about we all decide to do something?
But so what's the first step of doing something, like, because like, you don't want to, I mean, what is the first step?
I mean, the first step to correcting really any injustice, whether it's labor or otherwise, is to start educating yourself, right? Actively seek out some resources. And like, we have a whole page on our website that's resource oriented, just like basic like Union 101, what are your rights, examples of labor conditions in the games industry and like how other industries have unionized and like workers have benefited. Educating yourself is like step number one. Yeah. And then once you've got that kind of like foundation of like an actual direction that you want to head in, whether it's like unionizing with your coworkers or just working with like a group like Game Workers Unite, finally reaching out to someone else. I mean, people can get involved with us. They can go to our website and see all of our local chapters and things. But even just like we've been talking about, making that first conversation with a coworker that you really trust. Yeah. Just having one person in your life you can talk to about these things, it just opens the door to just literally just endless, progress.
Because you may know one person, but they may know 5 or 8, or they may think that you're the one person they know, and you may know 5 or 8, and suddenly it's, hey, you want to talk about this with more people? And enough people get together, like, all right, we have enough people to talk about it and to make demands at that point.
People need to take charge of their own lives and their own situations. Yeah. Like, even though, it's not fair that we've been saddled with these, like, shitty work conditions, it's like, we can still do something about it. Yeah. So take those first steps.
And in fact, we're the only people who can do something about it. No benevolent person is going to come along and say, I'm going to grant you better working conditions. The only people who can encourage this change are the workers.
I've had so many people reach out to me online or like in person talking to me and being like, I can't wait until you guys finally form like the U.S. union or the union in the U.K. or what have you. And it's like, why are you waiting? Like, if you're pumped about this, get involved. Like, it's a numbers game. Yep. Like, get involved. Start pulling the weight.
Well, is there anything that, so in the gamer community at large, one of the reason I started this podcast was because it frustrated me that there's so much talk in gaming, go on YouTube and every day there's 100 videos uploaded analyzing a game frame by frame, right? And like, here's my theory about the game, and here's why I think this game is better than the other.
There's such an obscure wall between
and there's almost
consumers
no talk.
And makers.
Yes. Yeah. My favorite thing is to see how often they get things wrong, and it's like, you
just don't
know. Yeah.
And that's not true. Film fans tend to know about how films are made, for instance.
But there was a concerted effort at one point in the 70s and 80s to like start making documentaries about the actual process of filmmaking and educating the populace.
There's a language.
And that's also when you start seeing like film like theory and film criticism become not just like a studied thing, but also a thing talked about in newspapers, right? Like educating the consumer base is like super important.
And I think we're getting there GW being covered in Kotaku and Waypoint and places like that, and also, which is helped out by the fact that all of these publications are also unionizing. I was chatting with a friend at Kotaku and we were talking about like, I was like, since I joined the WGA, and he was like, yeah, me too. We're like, everyone's more aware about these sorts of things. So that helps a bit. And so so this podcast is my effort to sort of like bring down that wall a bit and actually, talk to developers about what life as a developer is like, because I'm interested in that, and I was like, how come I've never heard this stuff before?
Every fan of games should be interested in this kind of stuff, right? Like, I mean, people are constantly talking about like, what is life like at Blizzard, or what is life like at Ubisoft Montreal, or whatever. Like, it's like, well, how about you actually find out? Let's like educate everybody. And like, I think podcasts like this are like extremely important in helping educate. And I feel like also the general games press is getting a lot better about being more frank about the realities of production and like actually making a concerted effort to explain more about the actual process behind games.
It's interesting to have seen the evolution of game journalism just being reviews and like, this game's 90 out of 100 or whatever, or 5 stars, to let's
Three
actually
puking guys.
Yeah, pretty much. Sad face, like, oh, I kind of liked it. To interviews with devs and more personal pieces about the people who work in the industry.
You even get some academic theory in there now, especially with like Austin Walker being so amazing at Waypoint. Like you definitely get some of that bookish stuff, which is great.
Yeah, the conversation is getting a little more mature.
Yeah,
and it's a little less like looking at the industry from afar and saying like, I really like what they're making, to like, let's talk about what they're making.
Yeah, but and I've noticed that trend as well. I've also noticed in like the sort of consumer press, like even the tech press, like the Verge type sites, getting more dubious about like, wait, what is happening at Elon Musk's factory?
Right.
And it's not just about his new bullshit he came up with. But for the folks at home who are just like fans of games, period, is there any support that they can lend if they're newly aware of the issue?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've actually been really fortunate. Oftentimes when we get press, we've seen our articles trending on like gamer subreddits, not game development subreddits, but like actual like gaming and like multiplayer gaming kind of like subreddits, right? And people really are interested in what we have to say and, the conditions of labor in the industry. And so like, yeah, I think reaching out to these people is really important, and people can, it's important just to even share some of like the action that we're doing, share some of the articles that we share, whether like Polygon does a great write-up of some studio that's doing some kind of poor practices. Just even sharing that amongst your like, gamer kind of like friend groups and things like that.
Yeah.
Helping to distribute that message is important.
Yeah, and of course, if you're a consumer, voting with your wallet is always sort of the thing people say. Like if you play games from a studio and then you find out this studio is abusing the heck out of its workers to produce those games, maybe don't buy the DLC for those games, or maybe think twice before you give them money, because that money is the only
validation.
Yeah, it's the only message that we get from consumers that what we're doing is like what we should be or should not be doing. When I say we, I mean the people who make decisions in the industry.
Yeah.
If they don't make money off of a game that they abuse the hell out of their workers to produce, then hopefully they make it. And we, with feedback from the players saying, well, we didn't buy this because of X, Y, and Z, they might go like, maybe X, Y, and Z.
And they're and the industry is so responsive to what players want. I mean, it's like loot boxes gone like that, right? Yeah. New Smash, literally everything the subreddit ever asked for is like go to the list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is just something that like there's fan pressure can really make a huge difference, and there just needs more conversation about it.
In many ways, it's stronger than developer pressure, and it's a strange thing to see, for better or worse. But if enough fans
it takes both angles, but seeing consumers starting to get actually riled up about not just exploitative like labor practices in the industry, but also exploitative business practices. Like I think those are places where we can find a lot of solidarity with people who just play games and not just make games.
Yeah, because I mean, gamers love to be mad at the companies.
Hell yeah!
And it's so funny. Like I streamed all of God of War. I got a little stream going. About like 40 people in there, and they're always they're just everybody knows everything about every game, even right after it comes out. People, I heard there's no DLC for this game, or whatever. Like, well, I heard that the guy said this or that about it, and nobody said about that game. Oh, hey, I heard they crunched for 5 years to make that game, and I would love it if they had. That would have been awesome.
Also, a lot of that anger is often misdirected, not at the actual corporations. Like, often people will be like, I hate this or that company or that studio, but often the actual anger and ire,
they'll go find a dev on Twitter and they'll be like, "Why did you make this decision?" And typically women,
and typically like people who aren't straight cis men, like they will target them on Twitter and like drive them off of the platform or like out of their jobs. Sometimes it's it's not their fault. Like I can guarantee you, no systems designer has ever wanted to design like some terrible shitty loot box mechanic or some gambling mechanic. Like that's not why they got into the game. They love games just like everyone else. So understanding that it's not about, individual devs, ruining games, quote unquote, but like it's about management, and it's about employers, and it's about like the people running these studios.
Yeah, it's like that capitalist critique that the sort of angry video game nerd kind of like, this company just wants my money and I'm mad. Like that's not incorrect in the broad strokes, but
sure.
it's like, what are you focusing that
Aim
on?
it right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Take that anger,
Learn about it.
which is like righteous as hell.
Yeah.
But like aim it at the right people and like fight with workers to like improve the industry, not just for workers, labor conditions, but also to make better, higher quality games to a higher standard.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, hey, in my industry, it's really like, the reason things go union is because they're better.
Right.
It's like tiered. It's the better shows are
true.
like that's why our show flipped. I said, hey, I can't get writers if we don't flip, and we got them. And like if they want to cheap out and make a reality show, they don't have to.
I remember in 2007 or 2008 there was the big writing strike.
Yep.
And like shows got really awful when that strike happened, because it's like, oh, all the good writers are on strike. We got to bring in like people who don't know what they're doing.
I think most of the time they didn't even write that. They were just like, we got to shoot what we have.
Yeah.
I mean, we almost, the WGA almost went on strike last year, and I was in a position of, well, I'm also the EP and the star of the show, so we would have had to, if it had happened, the deal was signed in the last hour before the strike would have happened. And if we had gone on strike, it was like right before we were shooting, or was it while we were shooting? I would have had to start like shooting scripts that weren't done, basically, where it's like, we've got another 2 months to work on this script, but it's either we don't shoot it, and like what pressure am I going to get from the network about that, or we got to shoot something that isn't done yet, and like this shit's not all fact checked yet, or like the jokes aren't good, and I mean that's but that at the end of the day though, that was like a scary moment. At the end of the day, it's worth it because I have a pension. It's like
right,
I'll be able to retire.
For sure. No, and that
must
important.
be nice. I wonder what that is.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be bragging. I'm so sorry.
The two developers in the room are just like, pensions.
What is pension?
Retirement?
Yes. What is this
I don't
pension?
understand.
Yeah.
I mean, now more than ever, like, I mean, just the general workforce is not looking at retirement or pensions just at all. Like, our entire economy is like totally switching to a gig economy that doesn't support like traditional salary and benefits and things.
Yeah.
And that's a nightmare of its own accord.
It's seen as maybe an inevitability, like this is just how work is going, but I don't think that's true. I think it's just how work has gone in the last 3 or 4 decades since
and
unions
I think
have
it's
been
causing
declawed.
Absolutely. And I think because of this pendulum swing towards kind of like this more chaotic, awful, decentralized like form of employment throughout the industries, like I think we're starting to see a reawakening of like labor pressure and labor issue awareness.
I think
I hope so.
We got to the point where you would hear commercials where a guy'd be like, "This job's my side hustle," and it's like, that's beyond irony at this point.
No,
like,
it's not.
Yeah.
All those like Fiverr posters all over like San Francisco and stuff. Whenever I go to GDC, it's like I drink a coffee for lunch and like I work till 12. It's like what is this?
Yeah,
Who are you
like
appealing
we're
to?
being
This is awful.
that blatant at this point.
Yeah.
Clearly,
I mean,
it's gotten
the whole Uber thing of like, oh, drive Uber a little bit, then you can take your girlfriend out to dinner.
No, people are trying to make careers out of it because they have no other option.
Yeah.
Well, and people are realizing, also part of the reason that they advertise that way is because you literally cannot make a living doing Uber. People are finding that something like half of Uber and Lyft drivers in LA are doing it full time, and most are not able to make a living. A lot of them don't even break even. Mm-hmm. So the only way they even get drivers is if someone's like, I'll do it for half an hour once a week. Yeah. And they don't like look at all the math of like the gas that they're spending. But if you're the type of person who's like, I'm going to lease a car and drive this for 8 hours a day, you're not making your money.
And like people don't take into account, it's like not just like gas, but like you will wear that car into the ground. Like traditional unionized taxi companies have like massive maintenance staff keeping those cars running because like you cannot drive a car for like 8 or 10 hours a day and keep it on the road for more than a few months.
There's an enormous cost to that industry existing, and
it's not funded by the company.
A company like Uber figured out we can make the workers pay the cost entirely.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it is as labor practices get worse and worse in the country, as they very clearly have, and there's like at the same time like a spark of like a new labor movement, like in publishing of all places, I can only hope that that's like that's like a recurring trend that we'll keep seeing. Thank you guys for coming on to talk to us about it.
Hell yeah. No, I mean, thank you for having us. It's really important to us.
This has been rad.
Where can folks find more info?
For sure. I mean, first off, people should go to Twitter and follow us at GameWorkers. That's like one of the main ways we kind of like communicate with folks and, let people know about our action, but also share like, useful articles and information from like other sources. And then second, if you actually want to get involved, I would say go to gameworkersunite.org and check out, our Why Are We Organizing page, which is actually taken from the Polygon Union website, at least the concept, just as like a landing page of like, why are we doing this? Like, what is this all about? And then, read up on our resources page, check out like how you can get involved with all of our local chapters or the international chapter. Actually get involved if you have the ability and time.
Yeah. And talk about unions. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Like, you figure out who the narcs at your company are and talk with people who aren't narcs. I guarantee they will feel the same way you do.
It's true. Yeah. Everyone around you is just as pissed off. Everyone wants like better conditions. Start bridging those gaps of communication.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, no, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Steve and Emma from Game Workers Unite for coming on the show, and that'll do it for this episode of Humans Who Make Games. If you want to support the show, please subscribe and leave a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Adam Conover, sign up for my newsletter at adamconover.net, or follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Adam Conover. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
This podcast was brought to you by Starburns Audio and IGN. Produced by Noah Eberhardt, engineered by Matt Brousseau, and executive produced by Jason Smith and Brian Baldinger. Listen to this podcast a day early using the Himalaya Podcast app, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts.